Hello there. Hey, Mark.
Hey, how are you doing, Melissa?
I'm well. How are you on the other side of the world?
I am doing well on the other side of the world over here. So, way on the other side of the world, on the other side of the globe. How are things going over there? We're still in various forms of lockdown in the United States. We've opened up a lot of things, including barbershops and not the gyms yet, I don't think. But what is it going like in Australia?
What's interesting to say is that Australia has experienced COVID-19 very differently than the US. So it wasn't as massive and fear driven as my perception, right? Being so many miles away. So right now the gyms are open. In terms of schools, the schools had closed. So there was homeschooling. I have three little boys. So that was quite the journey or adventure, and they are back open. So it's been a different sort of flavor, right, than you guys over there. It's definitely a lot more, how can I say it? I'm not going to call it casual, but let's just say that the cafes are buzzing and it's almost like it never shut down. But there is, of course, social distancing. That's for sure. There aren't people really wearing masks, right? So that's the other piece of it. But our numbers in comparison to the US were really, really small. So
Right.
it seems that they were able to take action a little sooner in terms of when they heard the news.
Well, that's really good. Now you're doing career counseling, and that's something that is really big, and particularly really big here in this area because a lot of people have lost their jobs. We have been having major unemployment and things of that nature. So I know career counseling is something that a lot of people are looking for advice for, just in general. But here we've had a lot of people that have gone into service industries. Like I've got some friends that are driving for companies like Grubhub, and I don't even know if y'all have those kind of companies in Australia, or DoorDash. It's basically delivery of your food from restaurants by private citizens. So instead of them having their delivery people, it's a service where the private citizens are delivering because they become Grubhub kind of folks, or they become DoorDash, or those are some of the services. And then there's also people who are personally being transported by like Uber and Lyft and things of that nature. So are those the industries that are big in Australia, or y'all having folks that are going into that? And what's the economy like in Australia? Because right now we seem to be in the middle of a recession, or at least heading toward a recession here in the United States.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, as far as the people that I career coach, so it would be like mid-career to senior executives that are really focused on marketing specifically and working for like organizations. So not entrepreneurs, but really people that want to continue to grow their career in a corporate perspective. And what I've noticed is that in terms of looking at it from a sector perspective, let's just take a look at people that are in marketing, given that is my area of expertise. So the cuts have been very deep, right, from a US perspective. And a lot of times that is because it's a little harder at times for senior leadership to very effectively quantify the revenue value or cost cutting value that a marketing professional has specifically delivered. So there's that challenge versus a salesperson. Like a salesperson, you can see, okay, the lead that walked through the door is the one that they brought in the door for the
Right.
most part. Obviously, it's subjective too. So what that means is that right now, from a career coaching perspective, for people in that sort of sector, or not sector, job function across sectors, it's really about reimagining what the business challenges are right now, very specifically. And when I think about US perspective versus outside of the US perspective, the differences aren't that huge. So let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say someone was in the services sector. And so they were in the services sector from a US perspective or from here, Australia perspective. At the end of the day, what's going to be important is that you're adaptable regardless of what sector you're in and what part of the world you're in. From a US perspective, it's really interesting because the people that are adaptable, they're the ones that are going to be leading the charge with shifting the way business gets done in the US. So I'll give you an example. From a services perspective, if we look at it, in terms of like operations, a lot of companies in the US are no longer interested in having all of their supply chain and operations coming from outside of the US because of COVID-19, right? So that might be something as simple as, if you're in the services business, and let's say, and man, I wish I knew the name of these things, but you know how Starbucks has those sleeves? The sleeves,
Right.
basically. Like, let's just make pretend Starbucks in the services business, okay, they have these sleeves. They used to get them from China. Given what's happened now, there's all these like sort of extra hurdles that they've had to go through. So that means that you, as a person that's looking for an opportunity, let's just imagine, you might want to think, okay, so if now I want to work with Starbucks as an example, how can I demonstrate that I am adaptable, and maybe I could come up with other sources of like the sleeve for the coffee cup, like US companies. Like maybe that's something that I lead with in very tactically, like my cover letter. Maybe I say, I've thought about new ways that you can get the same sort of raw materials to make your services business continue to function in light of the challenges you're facing now. So it's about being adaptable, and that's something that is important either from a Australia perspective or a US perspective. So it doesn't change. What does change a lot of times is physical distance, right? And infrastructure. So from an Australia perspective, doing that and being like its own sort of like every man is an island sort of a thing, and having like distribution in the country, those things are a little more complicated just because of the distance. It's like we're far from other suppliers anyways. So a lot of what's been happening in Australia might actually be a best case study for someone in the US. It's like beef. There's a lot of beef here in Australia, and that's where a lot of people get their beef. So just looking at it from a more like a creative way, like if you're unemployed, is going to be interesting, because it's your job to reinterpret your value to an employer, regardless of the country, regardless of the sector, and regardless of the level of seniority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering, like, what are the some of the popular businesses in terms of going to other countries? Because you're right, Australia is so far away. It's one of the dream countries I want to visit, but y'all are way over there on the other side of the globe and everything. But do most of the Australian businesses do their business in like England and some of the part in Asia, some of the places that are closer to y'all? But I'm trying to think of like a major Australian business in the United States, and I'm sure there are some, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. So like maybe just clarify with some of my listeners, some of the folks that might be Australian businesses that we might not even know are Australian businesses that are global businesses. Because like I said, when I think of global businesses, I usually think of like I'm here in Durham, and of course Glaxo is a global business, and of course in the pharmaceutical industry, and it was British based. There were some French based companies, but can't think of any that are that far to the I guess that would be the left, that far to the left in terms of direction, not necessarily in terms of politics, but in terms of Australia. So just give my listeners a little bit about the Australian business market, particularly on the global market. So y'all primarily cater to the Asian population and the European population, or are there any companies that are U.S. based? You have a strong U.S. presence.
So this is the thing that is really interesting, right? So because we're so far away, and just to give you a little bit of context, so you're speaking to someone who moved to Australia maybe like a year and change ago, right? So my
Right.
perspective is like expat in Australia who's always done business from a global perspective. However, if I had to say, the one place that I know really, really, really deeply is US, right? So that's my perspective. So when I start thinking about what's going on in Australia from a different company perspective, what I have noticed is, and if there's an Australian listening, definitely send me the comment and feedback if this is wrong. But my perspective is that the malls that we have in the US that are Westfield malls, so Westfield is actually an Australian brand. So I'm thinking about malls I mean, the ones that come to mind are like Roosevelt Field Mall. I'm not sure if in New York, if Roosevelt Field Mall is a Westfield brand, but that's actually Australian. And so that's one way that people may have been kind of interacting with like an Australian sort of essence. The thing I will say is the following. So once you start moving, a brand to another culture, another country, another economic system, sort of, what happens is that then, is it really like a subsidiary? Is it like a joint venture with another entity? Is it totally like not Westfield for real? It's like Westfield for fake. So there's a lot of that goes on, right? Just like in terms of the way that companies structure these other entities that are beyond your shores. So an example here is, and this was me, coming here, and as a mom, I'm like, okay, I need to like furnish my home. So like in my mind, US perspective, I'm like Target, Walmart, because for me, I'm looking for things that are inexpensive because I have 3 kids. I'm not trying to have like a royal palace be destroyed by 3 very high energy kids.
Right.
So I said Target in my mind. So then, and of course, from a US perspective, we say Target because it's like the fancy, like mass retailer. Net, I go to Target. The logo looks surprisingly the same. I would have had no idea that it actually is not Target. There was an actual legal battle pertaining to the use of the logo, the name, the fact that you go in and it's eerie because it looks and smells like Target, but it's actually not. It's an imposter. So it's interesting, like just how that happens. And even Burger King too. So Burger King US perspective right here is called Hungry Jack's, and it's all because of a global legal sort of matter that they changed the name, and licenses were purchased, and obviously it's a whole different entity because it's a franchise model. So it's just interesting. But what I will say is this: the one thing I have noticed from a company perspective, whether it's Australia or it's in Europe or whatever, there's some things that are going to be low hanging fruit, right? So if you have a business that there's a lot of like there's shipments of actual physical heavy things, you're going to want to do business with people that are physically closer.
Right.
It's just going to reduce the cost to like, take something and put it somewhere else. So from an Australia perspective, as you can imagine, companies here do a lot of business with like their natural like neighbors, right? So like you have like relationships, of course, with like New Zealand. And then from a cultural perspective, to your point, you said, like Europe or the UK. So essentially it's that whole like frame of mind. Like if you have a very similar like appetite for a certain product and you are attracted to similar messaging, so like British English is different than American English, right? So in Australia, it's a commonwealth of the UK. So again, same thing. It's like it's a mindset thing. So from a marketing perspective, you think psychographics in a way, right? Not just demographics. And then from a demographics perspective, you think about very simple things like just visually the distance, like how far is this thing going to go? And all of that good stuff. But from an employment perspective, and in terms of, the people that I've spoken to on my podcast, what's really important, let's say if you are job seeking right now, regardless of the industry, is that you do know those nuances about companies. Like you should know those nuances about companies, but then it has to be contextualized. Like, okay, so this is a fact, whatever the fact might be, but okay, now we're in COVID-19. So let's add some context. And in this context, this is how I could add some value. And again, these are like the conversations I have with my clients.
Right.
And essentially a lot of times people are so scared, like being unemployed, and you feel kind of desperate and you feel unwanted. And there's a lot that goes on in your mind when you're kind of like the rug is pulled out from under you. And so what that tends to do to people is it puts them in this like fearful reaction, and then they don't take a moment to sit down and, like, as I mentioned before, really understand, like, not just what do they want in their career, But then what does the business that they're applying to for a job, what do they need in light of what's going on? So it's hard to settle the mind when you're going through a job search, which is a lot of times why people hire me, because they want to settle their mind, reflect, figure out what makes sense for them, the longer term sort of view, and then, do everything they need to do in order to move forward, which is hard. It's hard when
Yeah,
you're
it's
in that
very hard.
situation.
Now, how big is target marketing? Because I know here a lot of people are very much into target marketing. This was even before COVID, so they might be gearing toward the African American population. They might be gearing toward the youth population. They might be gearing toward women. They might, but different target markets that they go into. Is that still the same kind of model that y'all use, or from what you've seen in your experiences working there, and that they're using in Australia as well? Because I know that there's a large or decent population of the Aborigines that are in. I believe that's Australia, if I remember correctly. That are more of the minority population. So, is there specific target marketing that's going in on some of these markets that are in Australia?
So, I mean, in terms of the Australian market and target marketing, so at the end of the day, it's kind of like, how can I put this? So, whatever it is that the US is doing, maybe Australia then is going to do either, a little later, let's say. There's like a little bit of a lag, and I'm speaking not as an expert on the Australian market. This is
Right.
simply just a casual conversations that I've had with people that are here that are in marketing. So that's one thing to note. But one reason for that is simply infrastructural. Right now, is target marketing important? So target marketing has never stopped being important. Like, it's important if you're looking for a partner in life, you need to be targeted, right?
Right.
Like, if you want to marry someone that shares similar sort of ideology as yourself, like, you need to know that ahead of time and then execute on that idea, right? And then obviously love is a big piece of that. But then the other side of it from like a marketing perspective. So when I think of, for example, when I think about my podcast, right? So an interview with Melissa Lorena, and I think about like my target, right? So I look at it in a way that I am basically targeting people that want to dream again, like
Right.
people that are in not just in marketing in terms of my podcast, but people that want to dream again. And so the way that I think about my guests from a targeting marketing perspective is really, I think to myself, who's gonna share or who's gonna add value as far as like my portfolio of like people that are doing like amazing stuff, right? So from a targeting market perspective, rather than me say, okay, let me go and talk to all people that are CMOs, I decided, let me talk to people that have made like bold or gutsy choices in their career. Like, these are people that are less risk adverse, right? And so that's like the way that I thought about target marketing. In the way that someone that's looking for a job might want to think about target marketing, it's the same thing. It's basically really thinking about, what organizations are going to add value to my overall career narrative, not just where am I going to get a paycheck. Because once you start thinking like that, like this is about a paycheck, it ends up being a really short-term scenario, right? Because then you'll do anything for that paycheck, and a lot of times you'll lose sight of who you are. You go in an interview acting like someone that you're not. And then you'll wonder, why do I have to keep acting like that person that I'm not on the job to keep the job? And then you suffer from burnout. So target marketing, you could apply that concept in any setting, any country. And that's the only way that people are going to optimize their marketing dollars, period. Right? You have to be targeted. And in the job search, back to the point about people being scared, they lose sight of that for themselves, right? So they end up just applying to like anything under the sun without targeting, honing in on what's best for them. Because a lot of times, when you're in that scenario, um, it really is back to feeling desperate and like you're out of control, right? So like a marketer that has to manage their budget, you do have to target, whether you're in the US, you're in Australia, whether it's based on zip codes or it's based on something more sophisticated, and at the end of the day, if your message is not resonating, jobs, as a job seeker, as someone that's, putting together guests for your podcast, or like whatever it might be, then that's gonna be the flag that you need, or the cue you need to check out your targeting one more time, because what you're
Yeah.
saying, what is not going to resonate with every single person, and it's a waste of money for you to just assume. So from a multicultural perspective, to your earlier point, from a Australia perspective, that's a very interesting question in terms of the Aboriginal community here, right? So for me, the extent to which I've had interactions with people that are in that community is very limited, and I'll tell you one example. So over the last, it was December 2019, basically, it feels like a long time ago. Basically, me and my family, we decided to relocate from Sydney to Melbourne. And we did that because of the bushfires, as they call them here, wildfires. And the wildfires, although we're in the city in Sydney, the air quality was really, really scary. It looked like I was living on Mars. It was orange, like it was something I had never experienced. And I wanted to have my kids not have to breathe that. So we drove 10 hours to get to Melbourne. And in Melbourne, I always like to feel like I'm part of the community by just like showing up to things that are like culturally based or just interesting events. In Melbourne, they have this beautiful museum where they brought in an Aboriginal group of dancers, and it was meant for children and families. And what was interesting there is, again, which is kind of funny that I'm saying it now, but the dancers basically alluded to the fact that, the Aboriginal communities in Australia, they're physically very far from the major cities. So as a dance troupe, they have to get on a plane, and then on top of that, drive for like 10 hours extra to get into the middle of, the outback, let's say, here in Australia, to then start to perform and educate, the local teenagers that they would dance with. And so they used dancing as kind of like that carrot stick to excite the youth of the Aboriginal communities to feel proud about their heritage, and also to help them feel empowered, as in, you are able to share your voice, you're able to be yourself. There is value in being yourself. And so, whether marketing is reaching people that are that far inside of Australia, that remains to be seen. What I know is that they're definitely looking at the US, right, in terms of Black Lives Matter, and they're definitely participating here in Australia in terms of voicing their opinions about some Aboriginal community members that were and I don't know the details, but this is what I'm hearing, just like hearsay, that were either hurt or killed when they were held captive by official authorities here in Australia. But I am not like an expert in this space whatsoever. It's just me seeing that there's protests going on here that has been inspired by protests that have gone on in the US. Like that's, just from like a visual perspective, seeing this and noticing this and finding it different, really different, because my heritage is, so for example, I was born in New York. My mom and dad were born in New York. So it's my grandparents that are of Latino descent, so Puerto Rico and Cuba. And so for me, if I identify with anyone, it would be Latinos, and it would be people that are also like Taino descent. That would be more like the indigenous sort of thread that I have. But I can see how it's all part of one conversation that needs to be had, you know what I mean, in terms of wherever you are located. And I mean, this is a little bit me pontificating, but I also think that although there are multicultural marketing arms in different organizations like Procter and Gamble or General Mills and all of that, I also feel like, just like in the days of when there was like a digital department, and then there was like the non-digital department. I feel like it has to be infused into the bigger brand stories. And I
Hmm.
feel like it also needs to be, it can't be like a side note. In other words, it's like digital. Like, are we at a stage right now where we're thinking that, social media marketing is a side note? No. It's just like part of everything in terms of the brand infrastructure. Same concept. So I don't mean to like kind of deviate, but I think it's important to say that that all of this that I'm saying, it's relevant to people that are looking for jobs, in that I am literally telling you the business challenges and the context that you have to shape your own career narrative and story if you want to get attention now during, this down market that we're in. Not from a, you
Yeah,
know,
because that's
like,
one of the things that I've noticed that's really been interesting is that, and I think it was happening even beforehand, but definitely I think that with COVID, it's even happening more. Is more people are looking at entrepreneurship as an idea, as a way to get into business. Because I think that for a number of years here in the United States, a lot of communities got into that mode of what you were talking about, and I would even argue executives as well, where they get into that mode of falling into a job, getting comfortable with that job, and not really trying to figure out advancement in the job or ways to advance in the job. They just kind of like got into a position of comfortability. Some people have even called it some derogatory terms like the plantation mentality and things of that nature. But they just got comfortable in their own kind of job market and didn't try to find ways to advance. So, are you seeing in your time that you've been over there in Australia, are you seeing kind of a similar kind of mindset there? And would you agree with me that on the global market, we're seeing a bump in entrepreneurship, that more people are trying to find ways to create their own wealth, their own opportunities, and they might be using their own skill sets that they got from the corporate world, or they might be creating something totally brand new.
yeah, so that speaks to exactly my podcast, because what I have done is essentially brought guests who decided to either leave corporate America or create their own path. And what's really exciting about that, and also terrifying for anyone that's not there yet from a courage perspective, is that this idea of being an entrepreneur for real, and I want to be really clear, a lot of corporate executives say that they are intrapreneurial. I am not talking about being intrapreneurial, which means that you can be successful inside of a huge organization and basically lead the charge on certain things. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is entrepreneurial. So being an entrepreneur, obviously, back in the day, it wasn't something that was so respected and honored. We're talking like, in the 70s and 80s, let's say, right? But I would say, .com and all of that made it really exciting and interesting. Obviously, then it just like it bursted, but let's overlook that one major point, right? But at the end of the day, in terms of entrepreneurship, it's something that you have to, like, you can't take your foot off the gas. Like, you have to always have some way of landing your next opportunity. And it's really interesting because I lead these Q&A sessions, and I'm literally going to be sharing this insight with them. And the thing that I've noticed is that once you get comfortable, then you also act comfortably. And that's not going to help give you any growth. And it's not going to put you in a place or a position of visibility that's necessary, regardless of your background, regardless of, who you feel that you can be or how you can show up in an organization as your truest self. So there's a lot going on in terms of that. But, as far as feeling comfortable, I think I think that, the last person to have felt comfortable should have just been that person that worked for IBM and got that Rolex watch for their whatever 50th year at IBM. And even IBM has changed the way that they offer pension and all of that. So I think from that moment, everyone else that worked there, including IBM was my client at one point. I think everyone that worked there realized that, okay, there's no security. Job security is a fallacy. This is not a real thing. You might feel like you have a predictable life experience, let's say 9 to I'm just going to say a fake hour of working, working hours of 9 to 5, because we don't do that anymore. But let's just imagine, okay, you might feel that you have predictability Monday through Friday, and this predictability and these habits that you formed, they can last for a very long time. But then what happens? The financial crisis, right, of 2008 happens. Poof, you're knocked off, from your feet, right? Then what else happens? Senior leadership changes. Poof, again, you're knocked off under the rug is pulled out from under you. Now we have COVID, and that wasn't like something that you had time to get ready for. It was very overnight, especially services industries. It was kind of like, I appreciate your vision and that you want to have the coffee shop, but guess what? You're going to have to close down for 4 months now. So there's so much, the changes, the pace with which these changes are going to happen, it's going to speed up. Okay. Disruptions are not going to slow down. They're going to come at you, and they might come harder and more aggressive because we are more sophisticated in terms of the changes that we can make, right? Because of technology, because of access to like global talent. I mean, just look at Twitter right now. You can work for Twitter and you don't have to physically be there. It's, so this now means that you are truly competing against someone in another part of the world. So how do you stand out? It's basically knowing that the only security that you will ever have is basically consistently networking for the rest of your life. As an entrepreneur would be consistently prospecting for leads, period. There's no sugarcoating. There's no, anyone that's comfortable, this is the challenge. If you're really comfortable, it definitely is an illusion. It's an illusion. And at the end of the day, I promise you, like, this isn't even like, I can be Notre Dame right now. I promise you, you're gonna have a point where you're gonna have to do something that's really uncomfortable, and you would have wished that you had some sort of side hustle, or you were an entrepreneur, or you had your foot in the door with a decision maker in another place. It's just not, it's not responsible anymore not to be able to figure out how to add value to the world in a way that is going to untether you from an organization. It is no longer responsible. Like, this is not even because it's fun to be an entrepreneur. It's simply because at the end of the day, when you look at wealth, your income is not the only source of your wealth. It just should never ever be. People that are millionaires, billionaires, they have, 8 different revenue channels, 9, 10, 11 revenue channels. And some of them are, more passive. And I use the term loosely. I don't mean that they didn't work for that, but what I mean, like the stock market, let's just make pretend, right? And some of them are, tied to physical assets, right? So it's just looking at what's possible for you, in terms of your career with a broader perspective. And being entrepreneurial for real is something that you will need more of, because, as I mentioned, disruptions, they're coming, and they're coming at a faster rate. And for people in marketing, especially, because I mean, just in terms of the new sort of gadgets and tools that you'll have available to you to use as a marketer, like, you've got to always know how to talk to decision makers and convert them from strangers to internal champions, which is what I do a lot of. And with the podcast, I myself use my podcast to exercise my muscle, right? Like, who can I talk to? Who can I talk to that is like me, or who can I talk to that's not like me? And I think that's important. Talking to people that are the antithesis of you is a good thing. It's a good thing. They know things you don't know.
Yeah, they know things that you haven't learned and that you can learn from them. But I'm oftentimes surprised at how many people don't even understand the importance of marketing, or they understand it, but they don't have the skill set for it. Like, one of the things that me and some friends of mine talk about, and I'm just curious about your thoughts on two of these things. One of them is we have a lot of friends of ours that are in show business. They're in the music industry, they're in acting, they're in different things of that nature. And they've done quite well on the local level. But then when you go to them and you ask them about whether they have a business plan or whether they have any sort of marketing, that marketing skill, a lot of them don't have that. They don't have necessarily a plan to go with the talent. So they call it show business for a reason. You're part show and it's part business. So we just find a lot of them don't have the business aspect. They have the show part to down pat and on a lot of levels, but they may not have the business aspect. And we know that that's very important. And then the other thing, which I think that you'll find very interesting, is I have a good friend of mine, and we've done a number of consulting kind of engagements and things of that nature. And people are always wanting the advice. They're wanting the advice on how to do this or to do that. And a lot of times it's event planning because that's what we both have expertise in. Him doing more of the arena kind of stuff, and I've done festivals and a couple of other things. And they will want the advice, but then when it comes time to actually pay for the advice, then they don't want to do it as quickly because they want to get that advice for free. So you have a lot of people that want the service but don't want to necessarily give you the reward for that service. So I'm imagining that even in your own business that you're probably finding some folks that want to have that happen. They want to get the advice from a business aspect. They have the money to pay for your business skills, but then they're probably trying to get you to do it on either a low level of what the pay scale should be or no level.
Yeah, so I would say that's something that I thought through and have worked through very early on. So I've been doing this just in terms of, consulting and helping people since 1997. What does that mean? So basically, I had the benefit of working for a huge multinational when I was 17 years old. I know I look like a fetus, so that's why it's like 1997. Yeah, 1997. And so what I realized back then, and we're talking, I was 17, 18 years old. Back then, I thought to myself, wow, I'm learning from, one of the most admired companies in the universe. So back then, before the merger, it was Chase, right? So now it's JP Morgan Chase. So they have access to a lot of professional development. So they taught me as a kid, they taught me, okay, customer service. They taught me in terms of time management. I mean, they taught me so many things, and they also sponsored my college. So they taught me, and then they pay for my college, and then they pay for my books, and then they paid for me to intern with them for 4 years. So I had a very different perspective pertaining to, what should be compensated and what doesn't have to be compensated. Step one, anything can be, you could apply a dollar figure to anything. I think we saw that in like Art Basel in Miami with like a banana that was duct taped to the wall and like sold for over $100,000 or something. So anything can have a dollar figure to it. The whole equation is really interesting because on my podcast, I've interviewed several people that have been creative, right? That they're creative, and it could be like a filmmaker. I interviewed Diane Bell; she won a Sundance. I interviewed an artist, Louis Blanca, a Puerto Rican artist in New Jersey, and so he and I had the conversation. I interviewed Jacques Slade, and he's a YouTuber, sneakerhead. And so, what's interesting when I think about the accumulation of all these conversations, right, is that step one, it's a mindset thing, right? So at the end of the day, if you don't value what you or how you deliver value to the world, if you don't value it, then anybody that gets that vibe from you is going to take advantage of you. So that's step one. The other step is that you can't assume that people know you want to get compensated for seemingly casual advice, right? Picking your brain or whatever. So you have to be clear. You have to be upfront. Otherwise, it creates a lot of resentment. Like if you just start saying all your advice for free, or if you start doing something, even if you're doing something that is like nurturing in some way, or you're a helper or a caretaker, something that feels like morally right to do, even in those scenarios, if that is your job and the way you deliver value to the world, even in those scenarios, again, it all starts with you. Like, do you feel like you should, like, is this your profession? Is this your career? Is this what you want to build your livelihood around, right? So first, it's you. Like, do you feel that you deserve to be compensated? It's a very simple thing. Yes. Okay, great. So that means that you have to be really clear with the people around you, and you have to let them know, look, I'm your best friend in the universe. I will help you, move from this apartment to this other apartment. However, I just want to be really upfront because I think it's fair. I think it's fair that when we've spoken about X in the past, I've been able to share that information or that wisdom with you, and it's been free. And that's how I started my career early on. When I was 17, I wasn't asking my friends, give me, your $4.75, the minimum wage back then. I wasn't asking them for their money, you know. But as a human, you evolve, and so do your needs and the way that you deliver value to the world. So you are 100% in, it is within your right to then say, okay, from this moment forward, I think I want to just be really clear in terms of how we chat about this topic, right? Whether it's like your artistry or it's the way you add value to the world or you're a consultant, you just got to be really clear. And it's so funny that you asked me this, because I had another guest. Her name is Poonam, and so she's in the same space. Like, she does films, and she's a dancer, and she's an amazing woman. And so for her, given now this conversation pertaining to racial equality, diversity and inclusion, and all of that, people are turning to her because she's of Indian descent, and so she's a female, so she has a different point of view, and she's a writer. They're asking her, like, hey, can you look at my emails or something, like, are they like sensitive to what's going on now in terms of racism and diversity and inclusion and belonging. And that can totally be she could commercialize her point of view. Nothing stopping her, right? So it's a matter of just making sure that with her, for example, if it's something that she's always like done casually, she just has to like basically make sure expectations are set. And the big thing is, if you don't set expectations, you're going to suffer a lot, because then you're going to start thinking to yourself, you're going to start second guessing whether you even have something of value. And you don't want to get into that place, at all.
Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of folks do get into that place. Now, speaking of people, by the way, I did check out some of the guests you had. I found the Buddhist gentleman really fascinating as well, because he had totally changed his life and had some meditation and some things that you put on one of the more modern editions of your podcast. But what got you, because not many people be bold enough to move from the United States to Australia. So what got you to make this move? Was it just something that you always wanted to do, or did you just like one day wake up with your family and like, I think I want to go all the way from the New York, New Jersey area to the other side of the world and just kind of like get away from what's happening in the United States? What was it about? Well, one, was it about Australia that made you want to move there, and what made you just make this leap? Because, like I said, a lot of people will not be that brave. Like I said, one of the things I've said on this show and I've said on some other programs that I've been on is that I wanted to do more world travel, because I need to do more of it. I'm 58. Well, I'll be 58 on July 1st, and I've only been out of the country twice, if you want to count part of the Caribbean, because I went to Turkey when I was a baby. My dad was in the Air Force, and I was a little baby. Like, I think mom said I moved when I was like somewhere around 6 months old till I was like maybe 3. So it's been those early years as a baby in Turkey. And then recently I went with a friend of mine to the Caribbean. So we went to the U.S. Virgin Islands, we went to the Grand Turks, and we went to Puerto Rico. I think the Grand Turks, if I remember correctly, is partially owned by another country. So it might be Great Britain or something like that. So technically I was on another country's soil, like going on that Caribbean cruise, even though we know that Puerto Rico is a territory and has some things around independence. I'm actually a big fan of their independence, wanted to get it. And then we also have the U.S. Virgin Islands. But other than that, haven't traveled enough. So I need to do more traveling. But what got you to make this move?
So I love that question, because it's what a lot of people ask me, and they look at me and they're like, holy crap, you're gutsy. Because here's the whole thing, right? So there's a certain pattern that I was supposed to kind of follow, right? The pattern was such that, okay, so you get your education. So I heard that from my family like all the time. It's like, if you don't get your education, life is going to be horrible for you. Like, this was kind of like the general message. So I said, okay, I'm going to get my education. But then what I did was, as I got my education, and because I had been sponsored by Chase, and I also, when I pursued my MBA, I was also sponsored. So I don't have school debt. That's step one. And that's a big piece of the puzzle for some people, because there's that concern of, okay, I'm using the money to pay my debt, or I'm using the money to travel the world. Which do I choose, right? So for me, that's one thing that I would say I was extraordinarily blessed pertaining to both. But then on top of that, I worked really, really hard to get those scholarships. It wasn't like they were handed out. So that's something to share. The other thing is, I would say, so as a mom with three little children, one would imagine, okay, you graduate business school, you start your family, and then you buy a house, and then you stay in that house for like 30 years or something. And and what's interesting is that, from my parents' perspective and my husband's parents' perspective, that was their journey, that was their path, right? So they've been in there, they have that, that one phone number that they know forever, that one address, right? But not me. So I've always been more of a wanderer, naturally. And what's interesting is, having gone to business school in New Hampshire, like that was a bit of a journey for me, because I went to undergrad at NYU, and I'm from Queens, New York. So I am very much more plugged into, high rises and a bunch of buildings, and parks with graffiti and all that, than, the tall trees I noticed in New Hampshire. But what I noticed is that I like being around people that are different from me. It's something that's a source, because I'm very curious. So I was like, okay, that's great. So I told my husband one day, and that was maybe like, I don't know, 7 years ago. I said, wouldn't it be nice one day to relocate? This was before we had kids, so it may have been more than 7 years. Then my husband turned 40. So what did that mean? That mean, oh my God, existential crisis time, right? So basically, he and I were talking about, okay, well, this is what's expected. We bought a home in Connecticut, and our kids were going to school, and we had a rhythm to our life, right? And basically, my husband at that time said, I want something different for our sons. I want them to see that there's a bigger world than Connecticut, right? There's a bigger world than Queens. Obviously, from visiting grandparents, they saw that life too. And so we made that conscious decision. Like, that's as simple as it was. And then we just kept talking about it over and over and over. So at the end of the day, it was really curiosity that pulled us here. And then, like, how did Australia get on our map, on our radar, right? So I had never been here in my life. My husband had never been here in his life. So it was just that, for us, we said, okay, safety, like that's a priority, because we have three little boys. And then we also thought to ourselves, okay, can we figure out an employer? Obviously, I'm a career coach, so I was able to help my husband think this through. But it was easy because he followed my number one rule of always be networking. Can we figure out an employer where it would make sense for them to sponsor us, right? So there's like logistics, right? There's a lot of logistics that come into play if you want to relocate. And here's the difference between someone that gets stuck and bogged down by the logistics versus someone that says, screw it, I'm going to just do it anyway. I'm going to tell you about my mattress moment. That's what I call it. So I was sitting on this king size bed mattress that I had just bought maybe like a year before we left to Australia. And I was feeling increasingly stressed out because we had gotten our visa last minute from this employer, and I have my three kids, and we're basically I was trying to sell everything before moving here, and I couldn't sell my mattress. And I was sitting on the mattress, and I was like, obviously second guessing everything. I was like, should we do this? Oh my God, we have no reason to, like, we had we had a nanny, we had a house, we had everything was just like, routine. It was like I knew what to expect, where to go. I had bought a car a couple years before. Anyway, mattress moment. And at that moment, I remember my husband saying, oh my God, Melissa, do you want to not go to Australia? And when he said that, I was like, heck no, we're doing it anyway. So at that moment, I decided that I was just going to give my mattress to like my nanny's daughter. Like I was like, I just took that fake hurdle and I just let it go. And then ever since that moment, it was just like, okay, full speed ahead. I had a few weeks in order to like turn around a lot of stuff. I had to sell my car. Like, it's like you just get in this like survival mode when you have to execute. Same thing with you, Mark. For example, I interviewed someone on my podcast that owns a business in Scotland. And she told me for her personally, she doesn't like to keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. It gets her really angry. Like if she says, I want to open up a yarn shop, which she did in Scotland, if she says that like 27 times and doesn't do it, she gets so angry that then she pushes herself into action. Same idea. And I think the other thing is that although my husband and I had a very nicely laid out path in front of us, right? It didn't inspire me at all. Like it's like, oh wow, okay, so I get to know an address for the rest of my life and I have a phone number for the rest of my life. I look at my mom and dad. Okay, where are they? Is that where I want to be? And I even look at them in terms of their health, right? So their health right now it's evolving. They're less mobile, they're more in pain. So same concept. It's like, okay, do I want that, right? If I want that, great, proceed. There's the path, it's been laid out. If I don't want that, okay, so you've got to really be extraordinarily courageous, and you have to basically, even in your mind, if you have your mattress moment, like you're looking at like plane tickets online or something, you're like, oh, we're in the middle of COVID. I don't even know. Should I buy the ticket? Should I not? Because they might not have flights, whatever, whatever. Give yourself 6 months, buy the freaking ticket, just do it. Just do it, and then just think to yourself, okay, so damn, I did it. Now what do I have to do in order to just like execute on what I put out there? And that's it. My kids are fine. People ask me, they're like, oh, do your kids miss their friends, yada yada. My kids are very young. I have identical twins who are 6 and I have a 9-year-old. And for them, as long as mommy and papi are there, like they could care less if we're in Japan or we're here. So it's really a mindset, and it's just imagining for yourself. You're like, okay, is this American dream that we've been sold, is this need to stay in one house, like, is it really what I want, or is that like what I was told I should want? And getting to that level of self-awareness from a career, from an entrepreneurial corporate perspective, from a personal, breadwinner of a family perspective, that's what's going to help give you either an extraordinary life or an ordinary life. And I chose extraordinary.
Yeah, and sometimes you even have to like change your mindset, because I know my dad is an artist. He's a photographer, and he does some other art mediums as well. But as far as I'm concerned, that's like his fourth or fifth career. Because, like I said, he was in the Air Force when I was born, and then he became a civil rights person involved with a couple of civil rights organizations. Then he and my mom started a radio station. Then he went into the academic world as a professor, and now he's an artist. And I think, yeah, somewhere in there was also like an Andeville, which was a cooperative. So that's like 5 or 6 careers that I've named that he's had, and he's going to turn 80 this weekend. So, like I said, he's had a multitude of careers, and I'm sure I left out one or two, but he's definitely had a multitude of careers, and as best I can tell, been successful in most or all of them. So he definitely changes. Goes with his passions. And I think a lot of times that's what the folks don't do enough of, is go with their passions. They just kind of like get into a job, get into the rut of going to that job on a regular basis, and don't really have a passion for it. Because I'm thinking that that's probably what you're finding in your marketing consulting, and you're consulting with executives. Sometimes they get into these jobs and they get comfortable in those jobs. It might be the finances that they're comfortable with. It might be just the fact that they're doing this job on a regular basis. So they just get in a very comfortable place and don't necessarily try to advance, whether that's advancing in the job, like in the job sphere, like if you're a junior executive trying to become a senior executive and things of that nature. Because I know one of the things that I've had is I've actually had that fear myself and have missed some opportunities, because I know that there have been jobs, even in some of the cultural arts institutions that I've worked for, that the job would have posted, the job would be there, and I'd be like, I'd be a good candidate for that job. And I talked to myself about the job, but like many of us, I would talk myself out of the job. I'd be like, so and so is better. So and so is going to do a better job than that. I shouldn't even put my name in the hat. And then, you keep talking yourself into it and out of it, more out of it. And then by the time you realize that you've actually got bold enough to apply for the job is gone. Somebody's already got the job, and then you're sitting there regretting the fact that you didn't actually put your name in the hat. Whether you actually got the job or not, who knows? But you didn't even put your name in the game. Like I said, there's a lot of sports analogies that I could use, but you can't actually claim to be the best home run hitter unless you actually take a swing at the bat. So you actually have to do it, and you just can't like go up there and not take an effort. So I know just in my life, I've done that a couple times where I've missed out on opportunities because I was afraid of the challenge. And I was wondering, are you finding that with some of your corporate folks that they are maybe at a junior level or a level in the corporations, and you have to talk them into being able to want to go for the bigger job?
All the time, and it's interesting. So in terms of some of the people that I'm supporting right now, and that I would have to then kind of leave you for it, essentially in terms of thinking about whether you should go for a job or not, or a higher level job or not. What's interesting is there's a lot of fear of rejection, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that we actually reject ourselves way more than external people. And there's no sort of I haven't heard people really pointing that out as much. So it's like this fear of rejection versus like an external entity, like an employer, your boss, your whatever. But what about yourself? Like, you second guessed yourself, you rejected yourself flat out. You literally said, no, Mark, you know what I mean, to that job. So that's that. So why don't we start reframing how we think about rejection? Like, you can reject yourself until the cows come home, and basically see where that gets you. Nowhere. It's going to be you drifting, and essentially just kind of like, going through life in a way that doesn't have some sort of North Star that's going to inspire or ignite you. Or you can just really think to yourself, okay, what's possible for me? Right? So what would have been possible for me, and I want to just share with you in the interest of time, like I could just leave with this thought. But what was possible for me in high school, as an example, as defined by my guidance counselor back then, was for me to go to a junior college. Like, she said, oh, go to a junior college, you'll get in, and that's kind of it, right? And so I listened and I said, well, that's that, I don't want to hear that. Like, I don't like how that sounds. So what I did was I redefined what was possible for myself. So basically, I went and I joined Aspira, which is an organization that has a lot of Latino heritage in it, and Puerto Rican pride and all of that. And I found my own guidance counselor. Okay. And I was like, what, 16, 17 or whatever. And basically that guidance counselor told me something I did want to hear. She said, Melissa, here's this book, because obviously it wasn't all digital back then. She's like, here's this huge college book, and I want you to look at all the colleges. And rather than me look at the colleges that I was familiar with, I just zoomed in on acceptance rates. And I said, you know what? Let me go after the ones that have the shortest, the smallest acceptance rates. Granted, I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment in that way, but that's what I did. So I said, okay, I'm going to go after Princeton. I'm going to go after Tufts. I'm going to go after Wesleyan, like, big brand schools. I'm going to go after those schools. And so I saw what was possible for me, even though that guidance counselor saw something different. So surprise, surprise, I get a full scholarship to NYU. Who was the first person hugging me? That's like Judas right there. but same thing, like as a professional, I could be talking to someone that is 50 years old and have a career in whatever for, like, 20 years, 25 years. But at the core, it's almost like we're still those little kids, and we're still looking for acceptance from other people. But the first person that has to, give you that acceptance is yourself. So if you cannot imagine for yourself that you can be a senior leader, then no one else is going to do that. And that's like step one. So to your point, Mark, it is a mindset. It is a mindset thing for sure. And it's something that has to be, that's the first hurdle before you even dare press submit to like VP, SVP, C-suite opportunities. But if you don't even press submit, you just rejected yourself.
Right. You're right. And a lot of times that's what happens. I know you got to get ready to go and everything, but just along those same lines, just to share a story, a friend of mine who's another artist, and I've known him for a while. He's actually lives in Australia now. I can't remember whether he's in Sydney or Melbourne, but he did something similar. He was an artist, a successful career as an artist here in Durham, North Carolina, and actually bought, as I recall it, I think he bought one of the townhomes. This was in our first wave. We're in our second or third wave of gentrification. Of course, that's all been stopped because of COVID, but there was a lot of building and a lot of construction of new buildings and condos and things. And he bought one of those, and then I turned around one day and he's telling me, I'm getting ready to go to Australia. I don't think that he has, I didn't know he has dual citizenship now, and I don't remember whether he had it at that time or not, but he moved to Australia, and actually he met his wife over there in Australia. So he actually found love when he moved over there. 'Cause I think he went there for school and some other things. So he actually found love when he moved to Australia. So he was another one that definitely made that kind of leap. So it's good to see folks like you and him that made that leap and actually had some success with what they did. So glad that you were able to do that. And I think more people need to do that. And just real quick, because like I said, I know you got to get ready to wind down, but I think that also the computer is going to open up a lot of entrepreneurship businesses, because it used to be that you would work those hours and you would hear about the executives who were working many hours in the corporation. Like they might be in IBM, which you mentioned earlier, or they might be at like a store. Like I know you mentioned a coffee shop earlier. They might be there from like the time it opens to the time it closes, but they were locked into the building. They were locked into the physical building because they had to be there. But because now of the computer and the age of the computer, I think we're finding a lot of people that are able to do the work even from home without necessarily having to go into the office all the time. I mean, but at the same time, you also have to work a lot of hours, because I don't know any entrepreneur that just works. You mentioned the 9 to 5. I don't know any entrepreneur that actually works just the 8 hours and stops at 8 hours, because most of the entrepreneurs I know, they seem to work 12, 14. I might even argue in some cases 16 hours, because your mind is always thinking about the business aspect. So how do you balance that? And then I'll let you go on that note. But how do you balance regular life and the things you want to do outside of the work and the work life? Because I do find that a lot of entrepreneurs get caught up in so much of wanting to do the work that they get bogged down by the work, in my mind.
Yeah, so I do have to let you go because I already had the clients there, but I'll let you know. So you can only do one thing at a time. And so what does that mean? That means that in this season of your life, either your focus 100% is work, or your focus is 100% family, or as much as possible. So that's really the key. It's like me when I was pregnant with my kids. I couldn't then say, okay, and I'm gonna like build my career at the same pace and the same level of energy, because there is finite energy. Obviously working out, being healthy is helpful, and that's going to give you more energy, but ultimately it's really making a decision for the moment based on what's important. But Mark, I'm so happy that I was able to have this conversation with you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. If you will, real quickly, as you go to your client, please leave our listeners a way that they can hear your podcast. So if you'll give them the website for the podcast, and if you want to give them your contact information, that's how I'll leave on this note. And I'll also tell you that Tim Stone is watching, and he said, congratulations on the NYU scholarship. That is amazing. And Nazrel Hoke, so I'm not sure what that ethnicity is. It's spelled Nazrulho. QUE for the last name, but they just said to enjoy. So that's what their message to you and me was enjoy. But if you would, please leave your website and how folks can reach out to you and learn more about the amazing things that you're doing. And hopefully I'll have to get you back on some other time, because you were an amazing guest and I appreciate you.
Awesome. Yeah, just go to my website. It's Melissa, Melissa, Larina, LLARENA.com, melissalarena.com/podcast. The name of the podcast is An Interview with Melissa Larena, An Interview with Melissa Larena. It's available everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. And in terms of reaching out to me, just look up my name, Melissa Larena. I'm the CEO of Career Outcomes Matter. So just find me. I am definitely all over. So I appreciate this. Thank you again, Mark.
No problem. I thoroughly enjoyed having your conversation and hope to see you back in a later time. So definitely enjoyed talking to Melissa. We talked about a little bit of everything, ranging from Australia itself to, of course, some career advice that she gave, as well as just some of her own journey as to what got her from the New York area to Australia. And of course, she talked about a lot of other things as well. So I think we learned a lot during the course of this conversation, and we will definitely be hopefully reaching out to her in the future to have her back on to talk about more of these very important conversations and topics. So definitely it was great having Melissa on, and we look forward to having her back at a later time. And right now she's going off to visit with one of her clients, and that's what many of us need to do on a regular basis, is get those clients and do good work with them. And I'm sure her clients will be as impressed with her as we have been.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, so Lydia.